Okay, so we're talking about Abraham Lincoln. We're reading his story. In the story, there's a lot about his log cabin houses, all the way from where he's born. And I found this one through my research that Abraham Lincoln, there is a National Historic Park of his birthplace. It's not actually the house he was born in, but it's a replica, similar age. So I showed the kids this after refreshing their memory about where he was born. And then I brought him to this picture, and this is supposed to be the house that he moved to later and grew up in for a few more years. So I did that, and then I jumped into we're going to make his house for our art project. They were very excited about getting to build Abraham Lincoln's house and draw him next to his house. But I read this about when he was born, and the kids were able to look at our timeline down there, and they kind of made some connections. And we talked about 1865. That's when our war ended, around the time when it ended. So we were able to kind of connect that. We talked about the beautiful landscape and how open it was. And then I said, this is what it looked like inside, and their amazement was really cool. They wanted to know if that stuff was as old as it was, and I was able to tell them no. And then we talked about the fireplace. What was the fireplace for? And they were able to tell me that it wasn't just for heat, but also for cooking. And we were able to tie back to Little House on the Prairie and Abraham Lincoln, westward expansion, our Civil War era things. And then we jumped into, and I was able to tell them where it was. But they really liked looking at the pictures. Then we're able to, I even brought out the book. I picked up the book again and I said, hey, remember, we're reading this. And then I opened it up to, I don't know, the front page. Just to refresh their memory that yes, he lived in a log house. And we talked about that front page, and I brought it back to the page where he was born, and they were like, yeah, that's right. And I think I could see them thinking, oh, there's that fire, that's why that was there. And then I was able to close, and I said, well, we're not going to draw him as a boy, we're going to draw him as an older man, as president already. So now we're at the end of our unit. We finished it today, and they were very excited. And I took our timeline and kind of combined it with our westward expansion timeline, because Civil War kind of went in between the timeline. So I extended it, and that way we were able to talk about the Transcontinental Railroad and how the Pony Express kind of went into it. And they were even talking about the telegrams. So now my next unit is not necessarily a history unit, so I won't be doing a timeline, but I would like to look through the pictures and figure out what I can do on this front board for them to refer to throughout the day, even look at, glance at. Just often they ask me if they can help change it, or they get excited when it changes. So the next unit, I believe I'm going to do Cycles of Nature, which is different than a history one. But I think it's important to get that one in right before springtime. Okay, so then I always open up my cabinets and I kind of grab everything out and make a big mess, but it helps my brain just kind of to look through everything. I'll open up all my curriculum books, and then I have to focus myself a little better. So Cycles of Nature. I went out of order. Oh, that's insects. I went out of order, but because we were rolling so well with our history units from westward expansion into Civil War. It just made sense to keep it going that way. So if I'm looking into cycles of nature, I'm probably going to sit here and I'm just going to flip through my book and just see how many lessons it'll take. I know that first lesson usually takes a little bit for the kids to really start connecting with it. So that one, when I'm thinking ahead, probably will take more than one day, depending on how interesting it is. So like the first one, the cycle of daytime and nighttime, which I could probably do an art project for daytime and nighttime. Aha! But just looking at it, this is going to be a switch, which might be good for my kids because they've been on that history train with me for so long now that maybe it's time for them to give them a little switch into that science side of things because they're curious and they like to know. So let's see, the reasons for the seasons, which I have a book that goes along with this about the snowflake, so I could use that one during my rotations. I could have one of my mentors read that. There's 4 seasons in 1 year. I also like to look through, just a glance through the pictures. And then I read these the night before, sometimes during my prep if I have time. But I like to read through them the night before just to see what I could do. I'd love to get to a point where I have my vocabulary out for them to copy down. I think that would be good practice for them. But this one looks like it might be a little bit trickier on the vocabulary and less story oriented, which is the history is more story oriented. But I see caterpillars in here, which means I should probably order my caterpillars soon. And then the pictures. This is where I can see maybe what I can put on the board. But honestly, I won't know how to organize it until I've really taught the lessons, as then I can see, why do I need a picture of lavender or trees? How can I group it on my wall? So now I can maybe this is just the seasons. I could group them in a quad. Yep, seasons. So I could make a little sticker that says the seasons and then put these on the wall. So this one might not be a timeline, but maybe I'm lining them up like this, up and down on my front wall. It might even be that I don't need a full picture, but half pictures of these cycles of life. And that one looks kind of gross, but it's the fish or frog. But it really does take time to look through all this. It takes me a couple hours in the long end of my core knowledge, but the more I look into it beforehand, the better prepared I feel and know that I can get them through the lesson if I know what's coming next. Because on the days when I don't read through it ahead of time, then I'm reading it with them, and it's not always the smoothest lesson. So now I'm thinking, what are my scholars going to do? Now, we were given workbooks to go with it, but the time doesn't always give for all of this to be done. So I'm going to look through it and see, what do I need? What can I put together? What can I print that maybe the kids can have out in front of them while I'm reading to them? And sometimes they just need that. I'm listening for this, I'm looking for this while the teacher is talking. Or I can use it in my center rotations. So like this one is probably something that I can use when it is daytime for me. I'm facing This could probably be something they can hold on to while I'm reading. And these would be things I'd pull out, and I'd have my aide probably, I'd probably have her make the copies for me. Some of them I'd have her staple together. Some of them I would ask her to please put these separate. But some things in here I won't need to use. It just depends on how my lessons are going. This one has less to print out, whereas other ones had a lot more. And I could print everything, but I might not always get to everything. And that's okay, because I can have them write in their journals, or it's mostly discussion. When I did the War of 1812, I did use this, and I just had it as a note catcher. And it just depended on the time frame, and I didn't necessarily grade it, I just had it there to look at. Where when we talked about causes of the War of 1812, we wrote down the causes. Looking ahead, I'd wish that I would have had it out for them as I was going, and then they would take the notes as I was reading. But again, it also depends on time. So for my aide, I would print these from online because it's easier to make copies of rather than copying out of this book. But I would print them and then ask her kindly with a note, make copies of these and either back to back or not back to back and staple just to see. But it's good to look ahead.